Awesome. So starting with water infrastructure and equity in the U.S., this week we'll hear from experts in the wash space from all across the world. But today's discussion, we're really going to focus on the U.S., kind of as a primer for Friday's discussion on WASH in high-income countries. So hopefully you guys will all be around on Friday and can attend that day as well. But the work that we do through our program really focuses here domestically in projects and what we do. So just kind of wanted to put this into context. What do you think of when you think of water infrastructure and equity in the United States? Does anyone have initial thoughts that come to mind or things that they want to share? Yeah, go ahead. You can just shout them out. I know, everyone's eating. This is like a hard time to do open discussion.
Well, I don't live in the US, but I've heard that the drinking water quality differs from place to place. And usually in Black and Hispanic communities, the water quality there is poorer than in white-dominated areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Water quality is definitely, a concern here in the U.S. too, and especially, the inequity of seeing that disproportionately impact communities of color and people all across the U.S. Yeah, is there anything else?
I was just going to say the difference between municipal access and private well systems. So not everyone can be connected to a municipal system.
Yeah, absolutely, especially in, rural communities or communities that are, really dispersed and they don't have the same access to that centralized system that you would have in a more urban environment, definitely. Does anything else come to mind? I have some options on the next slide we can kind of talk through here, but these are just some things that we've seen through our work in water infrastructure in the U.S., that includes flooding, sewage overflows, contaminated water sources, as we've already mentioned. But it's important to note that these aren't just, the physical infrastructure that we're talking about here. We're also talking about the human elements, the impact to public health, affordability, the long-term operations and maintenance of all of these systems as well. And I think that it's also really important that we acknowledge the complex history of discrimination and underinvestment in, communities that got us to the point where we are today. So all of that just to kind of set the stage for the work that we're doing with Community Engineering Forum. On the screen here, you can see a map from the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, which was developed by the White House Council on Environmental Quality. And this is a really cool interactive map that you can use online that helps identify disadvantaged communities in the U.S. So a lot of you might be familiar with this tool, or this might be new information for you, but they're constantly, going through iterations of this tool, bringing in, new data, but essentially it overlays a lot of environmental and socioeconomic data to identify communities that are classified as overburdened or underserved in the U.S. and kind of target those areas for critical infrastructure investments. So you'll notice a lot of trends here, specifically rural communities all across the U.S., a lot of shaded areas in the south, a lot of shaded areas in along the Texas-Mexico border as well too, but these just kind of, help us identify where those communities are, and a lot of the work that we do are located in these communities. Just some stats on the state of U.S. infrastructure as well. Again, this might not be new information for you, but our partners at Dig Deep and the U.S. Water Alliance published a report closing the water access gap in the U.S. And they found that 2 million Americans don't have access to running water or working toilet at home, and that's just the data we have. There's likely a lot more than just 2 million Americans who struggle with this access. But what's more than that is we found that Native American households are 19 times more likely than white households to lack indoor plumbing, and that African American and Latino households are 2 times as likely. So to our point earlier, communities of color are definitely disproportionately impacted by this infrastructure inequity. And kind of taking a step back and looking more at the U.S. As a whole, but also outside of just water specific, the ASCE report card, which gives America's infrastructure a grade every couple years, the last one was in 2021, gave us a C- on all of our infrastructure. So that includes water infrastructure, roads, bridges, all of these things. And that C- is America in general. And so it's safe for us to assume that communities who are underserved or have a lack of investment would score even lower than that C- grade. The good news is that there is a historic level of investment that's coming out now for infrastructure improvements in the U.S. You might be familiar with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which was signed in 2021, which is putting tons of funding into critical infrastructure improvements, $55 billion specifically to improve water infrastructure. There's also the Inflation Reduction Act, the Justice 40 Executive Order, which overall goal of 40% of all of these benefits from federal investments go to these disadvantaged communities that we identified on the maps earlier, and also the Environmental Justice Executive Order. So it's definitely, becoming more prevalent, but just because we're doing these investments and federally, we're recognizing these challenges, doesn't mean that that money is just showing up in the pockets of the communities that really need access to this funding to improve their infrastructure. So Molly's going to talk a little bit now about what Community Engineering Corps is doing to help this issue.
Thank you, Brooke. So real quick, we'll just do a real high-level overview of what the Community Engineering Corps program is and what work we do with underserved communities across the U.S. So we are a partnership organization co-founded by the American Water Works Association, the American Society of Civil Engineers, and Engineers Without Borders USA. And for folks that are familiar with Engineers Without Borders international work, we describe ourselves as the domestic version of that. So we provide pro bono civil engineering consulting services to underserved communities across the United States, the indigenous nations, and the U.S. territories. We do this by mobilizing volunteers from our member network, so AWWA members, EWB members, and ASCE members, and really anybody that is interested in getting involved in this work in a volunteer capacity, we will have you. So we mobilize volunteer teams, develop teams of technical professionals that have the unique skill set that our clients are in need of, and then we kind of matchmake them with underserved communities that are in need of pro bono civil engineering consulting services. We were founded in 2014 and are celebrating 10 years this year. Again, kind of real quick, who do we partner with? Community Engineering Corps works with underserved communities, and we define community fairly loosely. That could be a nonprofit organization, a community-based organization, municipalities, utility districts, HOAs, tribal entities, really any organization that represents an underserved community. Additionally, the community must be underserved or not have the financial resources to otherwise pursue hiring a consultant to address the challenges they've identified. And they must have a technical or engineering deliverable that we can support with. We are engineers, so we like to really stick within our wheelhouse and just provide that pro bono civil engineering consulting services. And again, have no resources to otherwise achieve that technical scope. A few benefits of partnering with us. I guess we could probably gloss over this for this audience, but in general, we provide our volunteers with professional liability insurance coverage, which is huge for working in the US, which is very litigious in nature. And we strive to meet the same standard as that of a for-hire consultant. So because we are volunteer run, oftentimes our timelines are a little bit exaggerated when compared to the private sector, but we meet the same standard of care, same quality of deliverable. And there's a few other opportunities which we'll get on, or we'll discuss in more detail later on in this presentation. But real quick, we do serve the full civil sector. So we do some work in civil works, which is transportation, site development, drainage, things of that nature. We do some work in water and wastewater, which will be the focus of our presentation here today. And roughly half of our projects in any given year are water, wastewater projects. We also do some work in agriculture as well as structures in energy. So we really do span the full civil sector, though, as I mentioned, tend to focus a lot on water, wastewater, A, because there's a lot of need here in the United States, and B, because there's a lot of momentum at the federal level right now to get these funds to underserved communities. So we are part of that momentum. So what exactly do? We really do the full gamut of civil engineering consulting in a community. So that can start with investigation and evaluation, like doing a topographic survey, collecting water quality samples, performing energy audits, kind of doing the foundational investigation required to develop a project. And then we move on to developing deliverables like engineering reports, including preliminary engineering reports. And I will say our work in water wastewater in the US is primarily focused around the development of preliminary engineering reports. And these are technical documents that are developed and are required in an application for federal funding. So if our communities are looking to go after USDA rural development funding, state revolving loan funds, in order to get access to that funding, they have to have a preliminary engineering report, which can sometimes run them $60,000 to $100,000, depending on how complex the situation is in their community. So our focus in water wastewater, though we can take it to construction bid level documents, our focus is really developing the technical documentation like preliminary engineering reports that our clients can then use to go after state and federal funding for detailed design and for implementation. And again, we do support our clients with identifying and submitting applications for funding as well. All right, so some professional development opportunities. I'm sure y'all came here trying to learn more about, what professional development opportunities are offered through Community Engineering Corps. And in general, the folks that get involved in our program, be it from a volunteer experience or from a client experience, find that there's a lot of benefit in doing so. It's the opportunity to make a difference. I think that, I worked in the private sector in consulting for a long time and didn't have the opportunity to interface with my clients very much. I was sitting at my desk doing engineering design work and didn't really get to connect with the communities that I was working for. And this, getting involved in a program like Community Engineering Corps allows you the opportunity to interface with underserved communities and really help themselves get access to improved civil infrastructure. Additionally, it's an opportunity to hone your technical and project management skills. Folks in college can get involved in kind of project lead or project manager roles within Community Engineering Corps, which may take, on a traditional track, if you're in the private sector, it may take you a decade before you're in that role in a professional environment. So we really strive to get our young professionals, our students, some exposure to hands-on technical engineering or the development of solutions. So it's a good way to get some experience or to gain experience in a new field. I came from the stormwater sector. I got involved in this work in a volunteer capacity to kind of develop my skills in the drinking water, wastewater sector. And now I'm here full time. So it is an opportunity if you're looking to make a career pivot to get some exposure in a discipline that maybe is not your subject matter, that you're not a subject matter expert in. Additionally, it's an opportunity to expand your network and make new connections. Obviously, getting involved in work with underserved communities allows you to network with folks that are also very passionate about infrastructure equity. So it's a really great way to expand your network and practice communication and collaboration. I know, speaking for myself, I can always use improvements on communication skills, especially in a technical setting. So this is a great opportunity to do just that. There are mentorship opportunities. All of the students in YPs that volunteer as part of Community Engineering Corps are paired with technical professionals. We may get into this later, but our project teams consist of, at a minimum, 3 folks: the responsible engineer in charge, who's the technical lead, professional engineer licensed in the state of the project and the discipline of the project, the quality assurance manager, who's kind of like the secondary technical lead, and then the project lead. So every team has a technical lead, and that technical lead will often mentor the folks that are working on the project. It is also an opportunity to practice community-led development, which will be the focus of the remainder of our presentation. So we'll take some time here to take a bit of a deeper dive into engineering local impact using community-led development. And I think in this space, in WASH, I am hopeful that these conversations are being had really everywhere, internationally, domestically, really anytime you're working with an underserved community, and really a community in general. The community doesn't have to be underserved in order to practice community-led development. But quick disclaimer before we start here. I just want to state that we at Community Engineering Corps are not subject matter experts on community-led development. Go to your institutions of higher education like UNC, like CU out of Boulder, or University of Colorado out of Boulder, like Berkeley. There's a lot of great research coming out of institutions of higher education around this content. What you will see in this presentation is just our interpretation of community-led development and how we see it play out with the communities that we work with. We strongly encourage you to just absorb this information, participate in this discussion, and use this as a jumping off point if you have not been involved in community-led development conversations before, and then take this back to your workplace, to your communities, to the communities that you work with, and continue the conversation. So, the pillars of community-led development, as we understand them, again. First and foremost, community engagement and participation. So is the community that you're working with represented within the project decision-making process and given a seat at the table? Capacity building. Where are the capacity deficiencies within the utility or the community that you're working with, and what is needed to address those deficiencies? Sustainability. What is the environmental impact of the project, and is it affordable for the community over the long term? Local knowledge and contextual understanding. Are you not only considering but integrating the context behind the problem into the solution? Partnerships and collaboration. Are you leveraging local leadership and other stakeholders? And is there an identified process for checks and balances between partners working on the project? And then last but certainly not least, ethical considerations. Have you considered what may be necessary to obtain informed consent from the community? And have the benefits of the project been distributed ethically across the community? So these components help ensure that humanitarian engineering projects are not only technically effective, but also socially and culturally appropriate, sustainable, and truly beneficial to the communities that they're designed to serve. We'll take some time to explore these pillars in more depth, and then provide some time for discussion around how you might go about integrating community-led development into your work. All right, so first and foremost, we'll hone in a bit on community engagement and participation. By our understanding, there's three real key components to community engagement and participation, that being inclusion, collaborative decision-making, and cultural sensitivity. So for inclusion, we've identified that it's really important to actively engage a full cross-section of the community that you're working with, and ensure that marginalized populations within the community have a voice and a seat at the table. So making sure that you get a full cross-section of the community is challenging. Oftentimes, I know I do a lot of work internationally in predominantly Spanish-speaking communities, and the most vocal person is oftentimes the most educated and speaks English. And if they're the folks that you're, as technical assistance providers working in that community, if those most educated and English-speaking folks are the only folks you're working with, you might not be getting the needs of the full community. You really want to make sure that you're working with a body or a group of community representatives that represent a full cross-section of the community, from the eldest to the youngest, from the folks with the highest income to the folks with the lowest income, so that the problem that you're addressing and the input that you're receiving really represents the needs of the community rather than possibly a few vocal folks within the community. However, this is a bit nuanced because as technical assistance providers, we are not always in the position to support the community with developing that body. Oftentimes the community will elect a few folks to represent them in the project process. And as technical assistance providers, our job is not to tell them who to elect, right? Our job is to support them and maybe inform them on the importance of diversity within their board, or the importance of considering a full cross-section of the community when electing folks to represent them. So when, you come into a community, they've already elected a group of folks to represent them, and you're wanting to really support them with having a more inclusive environment, or maybe creating more diversity within their organization. Some things that you might consider are, facilitating community engagement events, or public meetings where there's opportunities for community members to provide direct feedback to their leaders. I think we're running a bit short on time, so I'm going to speed it up a bit. But the second item here is collaborative decision making. And again, kind of engaging the community in every step of the project to the extent they are interested and or available to be involved. So again, I think it is nuanced in the sense that we certainly want the community and representatives of the community involved in the project from the beginning, from scoping through implementation and operations and maintenance. However, there's a balance there between burdening the community with involvement and really getting them involved in the work. So it's important that you work with the community to identify their capacity. How much time do they have to dedicate to this effort and interest in being involved, and then incorporate them into the project suiting their needs. And then certainly it's critically to have community representation during all times where decisions are being made. So it is really important to make sure that the community is involved to the extent and capacity that they are able to be. And a few things that we've identified as critical is, knowing what your game plan is for engaging and soliciting input from the community. Is it hosting community meetings? Is it town hall style meetings? And not only, what's your game plan for soliciting feedback, but also what process do you have for implementing that feedback into the project? I think a lot of times I've seen technical assistance providers do an excellent job of asking, what is the feedback that the community has? And then that's where the buck stops. So it's really important that we have a process identified that clearly states, here's how we will take the information the community has provided and implement that into the project and the deliverables that we are developing. And it goes without saying that cultural sensitivity is crucial when it comes to successfully executing a project, really in any community. But understanding and respecting local customs, values, and traditions throughout the development process is really a key component to community-led development. We suggest that folks take the time to learn about the culture, customs, values, and traditions and history of the community we are working with. Like, for example, if you're working with a deeply religious community, knowing that will allow you to, maybe steer from hosting project meetings on Sunday, or leveraging the community as a place where you could host community-style meetings or get words out about the project that you are working on. So really, it's important to be culturally sensitive across the board, but certainly when practicing community-led development. All right. Second pillar is local knowledge and contextual understanding, and we've broken these down into strength-based approach, context-specific solutions, and flexibility. For the strength-based approach, we suggest leveraging local strengths, resources, and knowledge to address community-wide challenges. Oftentimes, and speaking really to the US, I would assume you can see this internationally as well, but the systemic injustices that resulted in these communities having infrastructure challenges in the first place are not unique to that community. There may be a different flavor that led to that community being in that particular situation, but in general, this is a common narrative experienced by many communities across the United States. So it's important to understand what nearby or regional communities, like what challenges those communities may have faced, and how they address those challenges. There's a lot of institutional knowledge that I think can be missed if we go into a community assuming that we know the solution and then implement based on our background rather than the community and the region's background. So it's really important to leverage local resources and networks to better understand the context of the problem and what some potential solutions may be in a more expedited manner. It will allow you to really get to the bottom a lot more quickly. Additionally, we like to note that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. You must consider historical context. Like, what is the history of oppression in the community? What is the community's relationship and perception with local regulators? Really, what is the history that has led to, you know, this infrastructure challenge being here in the first place? Second is context-specific solutions. And we need to speed it up. Anyway, I'll real quick breeze through here. Context-specific solutions, so designing projects that are appropriate for the specific social, cultural, and environmental context of the community. We like to highlight this element by really diving into the on-site septic system example. There are many communities across the United States that have widespread failing on-site septic systems. And I think as technical assistance providers, there is a propensity to try to lean in towards, okay, let's just replace the existing on-site septic systems and call it good. And I think if you're practicing community-led development and think about the context within which on-site septic failed on a wide scale across this community, you would realize that you have to look beyond the technical, right? Is there income constraints in this community that led to the community not being able to afford to maintain these systems long-term? Is there, you know, are folks in this community educated on the importance of operations and maintenance? What led to the failure outside of just the technical elements? Because oftentimes, you know, like we see internationally, you can go in and you can replace the infrastructure, but if you're not addressing the challenges that led to the infrastructure failure in the first place, you'll be right back where you were 5 years from now. So it's important to understand the context and really incorporate that into the development of a solution. Remaining flexible, very important, allow for adaptations to design based on community feedback. And really, again, kind of developing a framework for how you will solicit feedback from the community and how you will incorporate it as well. And capacity building is crucially important. The human element is really, really critical in development projects really across the board, but it's important to understand like what skill development is needed within the community to maintain this infrastructure long term. What, you know, that could be technical, financial, or managerial. What knowledge transfer is required, so ensuring that the knowledge needed to maintain and expand on the solution is passed on to the community and that the community has a clear understanding of that knowledge. So revisiting real quick our previous discussion regarding failing septic systems and the need to address the context around the infrastructure challenge. If the community decides to move forward with replacing on-site septic infrastructure with on-site septic infrastructure, does the solution require that the community develop and hone managerial and financial skills in order to ensure long-term sustainability? So that skill development, is it, you know, working with the community to do some type of training or educational outreach around, here is why it's important to maintain septic infrastructure. Here's what happens if it's not maintained. And also like financially, here's how much we think it will cost, and here is what we suggest you use as a process to build up reserves so that you're not hit with a $10,000 fee in 5 years for failed septic. So really working with the community to develop the training that will help them really see their infrastructure sustainable over time. And then real quick, as technical assistance providers, we need to not only communicate the knowledge needed to maintain and expand the solution, but also ensure that the community thoroughly understands and can apply that knowledge as well. So it's not just communicating, but ensuring that the way you're communicating is digestible for the community. I know as an engineer, I am certainly guilty of speaking in acronyms or, very technically with a less technical audience. So just making sure that the way that we're communicating and the style of both training for skill development and knowledge transfer is understandable for the community and really done in a way that allows them to really absorb that information and apply it moving forward. So we will do a case study real quick. And we might want to just cruise through and then do a case study at the end.
I think that works.
Okay, so we'll hold and we'll do the case study and kind of collaborative discussion at the end. We're a little short on time, so I think we're going to just combine two into one here, but I'll hand it back over to Brooke to go through the 3 remaining pillars.
Awesome, thanks Molly. And yeah, it would be impossible to really dive into depth on all of these pillars, which again, thanks Molly for encouraging folks to use local resources or reach out to institutions of higher education or whoever else might have resources available as well, because this is constantly evolving, we're learning as well. I just want to kind of quickly touch on the last 3 pillars and then we'll do a little case study and discussion. But the next one we want to talk about is sustainability. So that includes environmental stewardship, economic viability, and long-term planning. And so when we really think about sustainability, we think about it from not just an environmental perspective, but also an economic and a social perspective as well. So environmentally, are we developing solutions that minimize environmental impact and are designed for a changing climate? We know that the climate is changing. We have the data to show that. A lot of the local regulatory agencies haven't caught up to that or changed their design standards to include a changing climate. And some are, but I think it'll take some time in order for everyone to start doing that. And so are we really kind of doing our due diligence and designing to a standard that is something that's going to hold up 30, 50 years from now? Economic viability, ensuring that solutions are financially appropriate and affordable for the community, including long-term operations and maintenance. And Molly kind of already touched on this already, but when you upgrade a community's infrastructure, that ultimately has an impact on the entire community in terms of how are they going to pay that back if they get a loan from, the federal government. What is that going to do to their water rates? If a community is already struggling to pay their utility bills and they have a water utility of $20 that goes up to $50, that $30 difference could mean a lot for those people in that community. And so making sure you have a plan for understanding how that's going to impact them and what federal funding or state funding or local even options are available for funding that might make it a little bit easier on them economically. And that also includes, long-term operations and maintenance, as Molly said, making sure that, 5 years from now, you have the funds set aside to maintain that system. And then long-term planning, focusing on long-term impacts and the future needs of the community, not just a quick immediate fix, kind of thinking outside the box in terms of, is this community growing? Is the population going to double in 2 years if you improve their water infrastructure? Are they looking to bring in a new industry, including those things, which you get when you have those discussions with the community and have that kind of open line of communication and feedback as well. The next one I want to touch on is partnerships and collaboration, which includes multi-stakeholder involvement, local leadership, and shared responsibility. So for multi-stakeholder involvement, with the community's permission, collaborate with local governments, NGOs, and other stakeholders to align goals and resources. So making sure that you're hearing from all stakeholders in the process, not just local, but also state and federal. You're working with community organizations, you're working with the regulatory agency to really understand the complexity of the problem at hand and kind of think of holistic solutions that might be able to address that challenge. And some examples we have of that too are, I'm thinking, if you have a community that's looking to improve their infrastructure and you're thinking just kind of small at a community scale and they have some short-term fixes or things that might fix their existing infrastructure, if there is a county-wide plan for regionalization or things like that, it's just good to have those conversations so you understand the larger context of the project that's happening. For local leadership, prioritize the leadership of the local organizations and community members in the project. So we often say that those closest to the problem are also closest to the solution, meaning with that contextual understanding of what the challenge is, because they live it every day and they are the ones closest to that problem, also means that they are closest to the solution, will be able to provide valuable input on potential solutions. And then shared responsibility, ensure that all partners share responsibility and accountability for the project's success, meaning that you bring in all these stakeholders too, but it's not just, us as community engineering corps handing over a preliminary engineering report and kind of like backing off and just expecting the community to be able to take that to the finish line to get the funding that they need to implement that infrastructure. So it's really kind of holding each other accountable, making sure that you have other partners involved who can help them with the funding application. And then even, after they get funding, are they able to go through the RFP and procurement process, like making sure they have all the resources to really get that project through the finish line. And I think when you bring all those stakeholders together, you really kind of get that sense of like accountability and responsibility for the project as well. Ethical considerations, and then we'll go into our case study here, but informed consent, equity and accountability. For informed consent, ensuring that the community understands and agrees to the project and its potential impacts. And so Molly kind of touched on this earlier too, but just making sure that the community understands basically what they're agreeing to when they choose a preferred solution, and giving it to them in a way that they can understand it technically, and what it's going to do to them financially if it does increase their rates, or making sure they have a good understanding of what those impacts will be before they agree to a proposed solution, and giving them all the information for multiple different solutions so they can make the best choice that's right for them. In terms of equity, so strive to distribute the benefits of the project equitably among community members. And does this solution have negative impacts on any members of this community or the neighboring community? So making sure that you're working on a community project, you're not just helping one small subsection of the community, that you're really helping kind of across the board, again with that accurate cross section of the community, getting everyone involved up front, making sure that everyone is getting the benefit of the solution that you're proposing, and then also considering negative impacts on unintended impacts oftentimes, but on community members or neighboring community members as well. And we kind of touched on accountability already in the previous slide, but really kind of holding all parties and external partners accountable for the project outcomes, and really kind of that checks and balances to make sure that we all collaborate to get those projects through the finish line. Again, so that was all very quick. There's lots of information. We could go an hour on each of those slides, but just kind of a high-level overview. And now we wanted to kind of dive into a case study and a bit of group discussion with those around you as well. So I can go ahead and read this problem statement just to kind of facilitate discussion, get us thinking of what these pillars might look like in a real world experience. We see projects like this daily in the work that we do, and so just wanted to kind of give you an example so you can contextualize it a little bit. But I'll just read it from the screen here. The problem statement is: an underserved community located in southern U.S. has widespread failing septic infrastructure, and as a result, ponded, untreated sewage throughout their community that is making many residents sick. Many households are low income, underserved, and overburdened. The community has experienced decades of lack of investment and support, and has tried tirelessly to find a solution for their community to no avail. The community generally distrusts the governmental agencies, and as the community's primary experience with the government and associated agencies has been persecutory.
I don't know if that's
Persecutory. Essentially, the regulators show up and levy fine on top of fine, but provide no tangible support for those communities. So there's a good reason for lack of trust in these communities of their regulatory agencies. So we can go maybe start with the other case study. It's the same case study for both, but some just kind of general discussion questions that we want you guys to kind of think about. And again, maybe just like talk to the person next to you, groups of 3, 4, whatever makes sense. But those questions are: what processes might you use to ensure the project has adequate community engagement and participation, with special attention paid to inclusion, collaborative decision-making, and cultural sensitivity? And what questions might you ask the community to ensure you understand the context of the problem at hand? So we want you to think of those questions in the context of this community that we've shared here. And we'll give you maybe 5 or 6 minutes to talk to your neighbor. And then if anyone feels comfortable sharing, we'll get some thoughts and feedback. Thanks.
General Assembly. You also when we hit you too.
So I see low being important to actively involve the community, trying to like set up a time where community members can actually come to like especially like in a low income area.
Maybe they just advertise it like
Like maybe be overburdened, like not have as much capacity, like attend outside like meetings or, but still wanting to make sure that their like voice is heard, whether through like a formal like discussion forum meeting or just like survey.
Yeah, I think timing is key. It sounds like the community self-governance is not so much trusted as the higher authorities. So I would try and do something through the community to arrange, because they've got the database and the contact to
put in my lecture
and I would give 2 opportunities. One for an in-person opportunity is strictly better. And then second, maybe a survey that you can send out. And ask people
Oh, yeah.
Potentially the survey, depending on how it's sent out, or that could ask for additional options that the community might prefer to their would just prefer in council.
Focus group.
Directly ask not only for issues, but also identifying how this is
To start with a community level meeting and then try to go door to door. The outreach of the services.
People don't have a chief.
We might have a community like leaders, like association leaders, like a mayor.
That's sort of inherent in the
That's the project, okay.
of
Still,
leading off the
that's the
community. So
people,
no
like,
one
I don't think I know how to do
Special
that.
attention paid.
I don't have the context.
The governance structure.
Yeah, I've never been to the US, I didn't understand.
This is your first time?
This is my
Ask you.
But then this makes it pretty difficult for me because I know when I say
So making sure
New York mayor,
when
London
I
mayor.
say mayor in the context of South Africa, that's government for us. We do not deal with the mayor. So
You would
already,
ask.
take into account.
but then I've never had this.
Already has a good structure in one of them.
Indigenous communities.
We go to the Zulu.
Indigenous communities have tribal forms.
With your
I don't know about the US, that's what I'm saying. I don't know about the context of
just proportionally
in which
you are using
do the people who come with have tribal people
Indigenous
where
ones.
we're looking at.
Am I wrong? Indigenous
Yes, we didn't provide a bunch of,
the men are the loud ones, and they're the ones that are going to talk.
people actually speak.
but indigenous youth do have
Finding a way
tribal.
to.
Yeah, so if they have tribal leaders, then we go to the route that I know. So the tribal leader first you bring beer.
We bring beer and Congo.
You bring beer, you bring Umkongo, then you start the discussion.
After that, who do you go to next?
What I'm thinking you should say that is, for us, is there a safeguard to decide what that is harder in
Especially with
sometimes it's women. If you take away the water, for example, the women will be affected. Some women are the ones who have no title, most influential.
Local churches too, those can talk to those people. And they set up the
sector of society.
local churches,
Oh, yeah,
they
good
will
point.
come and have a discussion. Then you tell them your plan,
So
they tell you their plan, they
we get here,
that.
explain.
sector of society.
Is there a tendency that if you go, I mean,
Going there as well.
it's important to talk to the pastor,
This is not,
but is there a tendency that
this is not a trick.
Say you have and you are using Android, which is like if there's something you can span.
And also asking them what do
So
they
what
want.
happened here is, I'm gonna take an example, which is what I thought.
Especially if they've been
I've worked with NGOs.
impacted, or like if they have any frustrations with the like
What you
higher
would do
engagement.
is you would
Like
go
what
to
do
the,
they see as like a success for their own community?
tell them the idea, but they don't give you what
As opposed to
are they in solution they want from you. They
they're
organize,
like voicing what they.
they call, they call the people, and you have the people asking for what and they think
Prior
what
effort
you
to
guys
find a
do.
solution
Do
was
you
just, they
think
probably
this will
already.
work and where you want this to be? Even if it's a container-based sanitation, you have to agree with them where it's gonna be put, because if the people don't agree, they're gonna
Again, with the
burn it down.
question,
Unfortunately, they will burn it down and they
what does the community itself
set it up. So it had to be the pillar of
Always ask them
when they come,
their own
please,
what they
bring
understand.
whatever you think you can. Maybe they
That's a great point though. It sounds like you work through
Workers in the community.
Yes, but the leaders to which they actually do agree with, because if you start
Maybe a
with
history of,
the traditional leaders can shut everything down.
let them down.
be in their good graces.
Yes,
and,
because
very important?
because they can completely shut this down to say, you see, we have had people come and colonize us before, these are to the moment they say that, everything
Maybe going to
gets shut down, so you have to make sure.
why they have.
Talking about
In the
tuberculosis.
context that I've worked, it's just respect.
It's just a bit, or
So,
woman interview
yeah, you want to
with
get
teachers.
the objectives done, but it's respect that if you enter a home, you speak to theirs about the dad. You just don't
Solutions they have.
Swim, mobile, the back.
be like, yeah, I need to talk to her.
Yeah, what you
So
feel.
it's that respect for elders, for
It's not really superstition, it's like
that's all translates into like
I
engaging
think
in.
maybe in the interest of time, it might be best if we wrap up our group discussion.
Couldn't finish all the questions,
Like
right?
share back.
Otherwise, it's like, what questions might you ask the community to ensure?
Awesome, so I heard a lot of really great thoughts while I was walking around the room too. Does anyone have any kind of like context or feedback that they'd like to share from their group discussion, just about what you chatted about, things that came up while you were discussing these questions? Sure.
Hi, my name is Alicia from Cranfield University. So when we got the question, one of the things we started from was understanding the US context. Neither of us are from the US or have ever been to the US. So,
The entire group.
so it was about basing the discussion on our pre-knowledge of the US and our cultural societal backgrounds, what we would have done in this scenario. And one of the things that we got to was, first of all, understand who the powerful individuals are and also who are the key decision makers. So in the case of South Africa, you would contact like a tribal leader. And we realized that in indigenous First Nation communities in North America, we would want to understand who the tribal leaders are, who else do we need to speak to, and they will be our point of entry. They would introduce us to others as well. And hopefully through that, we were able to reach out to the entire community, whilst also paying attention to the cultural dynamics in that community. That's one of the things we realized, based on our backgrounds as people of African origins, was it's just a matter of respect to the cultural leaders when you enter a community. So that respect there is very important if you want to make sure that whatever you are presenting to the community, you get to achieve those objectives. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. No, that's a great point too. And it takes time to build trust and to make those connections too. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I find it interesting. We're, I think, mostly an American-centric group here, and probably a much different perspective than the African perspective, where we talk less about connecting to leadership and following structures, and more how do we get to the community members and understand, talking to the women, talking to parents of children affected by this. But yeah, just kind of an interesting difference in the approach that we would take. So pretty cool.
Yeah, great.
So yeah, in between Gina and myself, my name is Andres, and we also discussed about having an intro with community leaders, but eventually trying to get to the General Assembly, or like the actual community organization that discusses these topics, putting the information in there, and also to ensure some sort of collaborative decision making, trying to figure out if they have some sort of structure like committees or any type of work group within the community that could take on supporting this activity as well. You want to add something?
The process could actually be focus group discussion, so that you're able to get more views than only the leaders. So that's what we discussed. Second question.
Yeah.
You have an answer.
If someone else wants to.
Does anyone else have thoughts they want to share? Yeah, awesome. We have someone here. Thank you. No, thank you for that. I appreciate that perspective too. I think it is often difficult to, make sure you're getting that cross section of the community, and also, when you have those engagement events or reaching out to folks in the community too, I think, especially with communities that have a general lack of distrust too, it's hard to get people. So understanding like what will bring them in and incorporating their feedback too, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to share and discuss about this case. Reflecting for my experience working in Indonesian context, oftentimes to increase inclusion in collaborative decision making, it's difficult to do that only during the engineering project preparation. It's inclusion and equality in decision making is something so rooted in the paternalistic culture, and changing that oftentimes is not feasible during the engineering project preparation. So oftentimes what I've seen people have done is tap into assisting other social projects where communities already get other social support in increasing equality, inclusion, gender mainstreaming, and then when the engineering projects come in, they can tap into built-in better institutional support to have more inclusive process in the engineering project itself. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for that. And I think too, that goes to kind of our collaboration and partnership discussion too. If there are already nonprofit organizations or other community-based organizations that are kind of like building this trust and fostering, this inclusion and equity, kind of tapping into that or using that as a resource as well, definitely. We only have a couple minutes left, so we can quickly just maybe touch on the final two questions of the case study, and maybe we don't do breakout discussions, but if anyone has thoughts or feedback they want to share initially, we can just kind of have a larger discussion about it. But the additional questions from the second half of the pillars that we went through, what are the environmental, social, and economic factors to consider when it comes to long-term sustainability for the proposed infrastructure improvements in this community? And who are some of the key stakeholders in this scenario? What is their role in creating those sustainable solutions? Does anyone have thoughts that come to mind right off the back?
Hi, my name is Joan. I feel like this case study is kind of written for a project I'm working on right now. I'm project managing a water efficiency program in a rural area of Alabama. It's called the Black Belt, and if you're around on Thursday, there's a side session on sanitation in challenging environments that speaks to this. But the Black Belt is a swathe of Alabama that is clay, has low percolation rates, and this area is rural, so on-site sanitation systems is what people have, and traditional septic tanks are not working because of the low percolation rates. So there's a community organisation there that is very vocal and has been very effective attracting funding and has been very effective at identifying alternative wastewater treatment systems to put on people's homes that adapts to that environment. And then we've also realised that we need to reduce the amount of water that are going to these septic tanks, hence the internal water efficiency retrofits within homes as well. So all that to say is that gives some examples about the environment, so understanding this is a particular situation where traditional technologies don't work, so there's a need to provide some innovation, but also recognising this is an area of low income, that there's been a lot of kind of environmental injustice that's been suffered over decades, so there's a certain lot of community distrust as well that's had to be overcome by strong community leaders and persistence to try and find solutions and work with community members. And so in terms of the long-term sustainability, what this community organisation has done is to find a model where they can attract the funding to put in the infrastructure, but also as part of the community's commitment to the project is they have to sign on to commit to, I think it's $20 a month or something like that, to put into a fund that is managed, and that will manage for someone to go around and maintain these systems to try and build in that long-term sustainability. So.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for that. I think, you know, this is a common narrative that we're seeing in a lot of communities as well, and you kind of hit the nail on the head too. You think about the environmental impacts and you think about the long-term sustainability in terms of how are we going to operate and maintain this, and you don't want to, you know, be in the same situation 30 years from now because you miss some of those key factors too, so thank you for that. We're about at time, so we just want to end kind of quickly with a note on our role as technical assistance providers and really kind of how we see our role with CE Core. Again, this is pretty broad, but to encourage conversation, practice self-awareness, exchange ideas and solicit and incorporate feedback and alternative perspectives, provide resources and training, and provide a safe space for communities to learn and grow. And those are all kind of wrapped into those pillars that we discussed. But I also think it's important to highlight what our roles are not as technical assistance providers, to define right or wrong answers, to enforce a one-size-fits-all approach, to assume that we know the best solution for the community that we aren't a part of, and to isolate community from knowledge and representation. So I think we're out of time. Yeah, do you have a question here?
I know we're out of time, so if people need to leave, that's fine, but I've had a general question the whole time. I wasn't sure when to ask it.
Absolutely. Please ask away.
Awesome. So the question is, how do you identify communities in need? And just a quick background, my organization, Operation Blessing, works a lot in WASH community development internationally, but our domestic focus is disaster relief. We have teams in Asheville and Florida right now, and our team supports relief, but sees a lot of need for development. But we don't domestically have that capacity, whether it's because we don't have a PE licensed in that state, or we don't have the funding or red tape. And actually we had the same issues with my previous organization, Engineering Ministries International. There's a lot of work outside the country, but we see the need here. How do you identify communities in need, and how can we help?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to do something?
Awesome. As far as identifying communities in need, we don't solicit communities. So we get referred communities that might benefit from our support. Most of our water wastewater referrals come through our partner, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, or RCAP for short.
Interesting.
So these are capacity developing organizations that have long-term relationships with these communities, oftentimes 10 to 15 years of working with this community, and then they pull us in to execute the technical scope. But really, any community that you think might benefit from our support, feel free to refer them to us, so just reach out to us. There is a link on our website where you can submit a primary application. And then we'll go through and look at the CGES tool and look at the MHI and look at publicly available data, noting that oftentimes that is not granular enough to paint the need, or to paint an accurate picture rather of need in the community. So we do our due diligence to confirm that it's a scope we're comfortable with, we feel like we have the right volunteers, they meet our underserved criteria, and then move forward. So really, any underserved community in need of civil infrastructure support, feel free to refer them to us.
You said there's an official application for communities, not for volunteers.
That's correct, yes. It should be under the communities tab, and I apologize, our website is getting revamped, it's not the best.
Next week,
Exactly, yes. So thank you.
we can give you our cards too.
Okay.
There's some marketing material up here if you're interested in learning more about the program and our business cards. But thank you guys for taking your lunch session to chat with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. It should be at the top, but
Oh, it's after 3.
This is when some presentation.
That's fine.
I am the new student.
En la presentación.
Sí, así es que trabajamos con alumnos. Así es, pero en Darín. Así es, entonces por eso es la perspectiva ahí. Ha sido una presentación, son igual con las instituciones.
Probablemente con otras instituciones. Pero es más que nada porque están implementando la metodología Santoso a la Guajira. Pero sí, creo que la intención es expandir más allá de solo Santoso.
I think that
Otras metodologías.
is a program that should
Sí, el Santoso podría funcionar y al fin y al cabo la Guajira no de bajos recursos, está súper seco, no tiene limitar hasta
yeah, you can do
pero el
both
momento que lo haga,
either way. You can
igual hay
definitely
gente con
like
más plata.
for them if they want to so much about the application. We ask that they're like a part of it, but we also
Pero
understand that like
la plataforma igual monitorea qué tipo de soluciones están
they might
implementando o
not
simplemente
have
que haya
access to a computer
cobertura
or to like type in.
o el nivel de cobertura más.
You know, we often have
Que monitoree qué tipo de soluciones están
well, DC.
pero realmente
yeah,
o sea,
absolutely.
nosotros en la muestra con Satoso, entonces realmente los indicadores están en el por cada hora, la metodología Satoso, certificación de comunidades, cuántas son certificadas, cuántas están en positivación, también el número de soluciones sanitarias, el número de estaciones de lavado de manos, pero puede ser que si hay un programa que implementar otras alternativas, por ejemplo, construcción de fosas sépticas o alguna otra infraestructura, pues eso se va a ver reflejado. Eventualmente la idea es que distintos programas indicadores parecidos. ¿Cuándo incrementó la cobertura? ¿Con qué tipo de soluciones sanitarias? Ese tipo de cosas. Sería la idea.
No, muy interesante, que si al fin y al cabo esto de, me preguntaron cómo visualizar hacia el seguimiento a eso. Primero, cómo hacer el seguimiento a eso, ya es el reto de visitar los resultados, es una fase. ¿Quién lo va a visitar? Pero No, eso no sé. UNICEF tiene una propuesta, ellos están dispuestos a dedicar un poco de plata para el seguimiento, es difícil convencer mucho más.
Sí, yo creo que ellos están dispuestos. Y creo que realmente lo que ellos están buscando es socios implementadores que hagan el trabajo en campo.
Estamos implementando algo de UNICEF en Ecuador ahorita y le dije que se entiende por qué la gente rechaza hacer las ofertas de UNICEF.
Yeah, I love that you're reaching out to connect because we need more people like you, especially if you grew up there or if you have connections.
¿Tienes una tarjeta?
Unfortunately, since we don't have a work manager there at the time, I don't know
Bueno, sí, sigue
anything.
siendo algo.
Si algo me escribes.
We're looking at building that
Que al fin y al cabo,
other offices.
la mayoría de nuestro trabajo es en algo, saneamiento, pero ha sido muy interesante verlos a todos y obviamente está orgulloso de trabajar. Fue muy interesante escuchar que para ellos fue difícil no entregar así el costo real del
Simplemente los implementadores ayudaron mucho a los implementadores como están monitoreando. Que falta un poco como de fortalecer. Tienen muchas